My name is Alex Morgan, and I am 53 years old. I am the eldest in my family, the one who always handled the bills, the repairs, the hospital rides, and the quiet financial rescues no one ever talks about. I live just outside Boston in a modest home. I nearly finished paying off after decades of steady work. I co-own a small technology consulting firm with a partner. It is not glamorous, but it provides a stable living. At church, they know me as the calm one. In my neighborhood, I am the neighbor who lends tools and shovels snow without being asked. On paper, I look dependable, even respected. But respect inside my own family, that is another story. It was Thanksgiving evening, and my entire family had gathered around the long oak table in my dining room. The turkey had just been carved and laughter filled the air, the kind of laughter that feels warm for some but sharp for others. My longtime companion Rowan, 41 full of charm, the kind of person who wins over a crowd, stood up with a wine glass raised high. Their smile could have lit up the room, but the words that followed drained all the warmth out of it. Alex Rowan said, pausing just long enough for everyone to turn. "You're a great roommate. But let's be honest, we stopped being partners years ago. Let's just keep things simple, friends who split the space and expenses. Nothing more." The room went silent, then burst into awkward chuckles. Someone clinked a glass, pretending it was all in good humor. Rowan's tone was light, almost playful, but the sting was sharp. Imagine having your relationship reduced to a rental agreement right there in front of parents, cousins, nieces, nephews. And as if the humiliation weren't enough, Rowan added, "After all, with your mother's estate about to open up, what was it, $2.5 million, you'll be just fine. We'll keep living as we do. Comfortable, right?" Every fork froze. $2.5 million. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother had passed earlier that year, and while the family had speculated about her will, I had kept quiet. Now Rowan had dragged it into the open as if it were community property, as if I were simply a bank to be shared. I did not speak. I poured tea for my aunt, nodded at my father, and let the moment pass. Silence, I've learned, is stronger than the loudest insult. While they laughed nervously, I was already building a wall inside my mind. If you've ever been dismissed by family in front of everyone, share your story in the comments so I know I'm not alone. I was not always the quiet one. In my younger years, I tried to defend myself, to argue back, whenever my place in the family felt uncertain. But years of small betrayals taught me a different kind of discipline. You learn that silence preserves dignity better than shouting in a crowded room. My story with Rowan is layered. We had met more than a decade ago when I was busy growing the consulting business. I admired their energy. Rowan was the life of every gathering, never short of a clever phrase or a stylish entrance. People adored Rowan. They seemed effortless, like a character from a magazine. I, on the other hand, was the one who balanced spreadsheets, renewed insurance policies, and paid the mortgage every month. Dependable, yes. Exciting, no. It was not just Rowan, though. Favoritism ran deep in my family. My younger cousin Casey, for instance, was often held up as an example of charm and brightness. They drifted between jobs, but were always treated like a rising star. "Casey just needs one lucky break," my aunt would say. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the anchor, the one who covered the electric bill when winter storms hit, or drove across town when someone's car broke down. Casey would sit at my kitchen counter sipping the coffee I paid for, and tease Alex, "You're so tight with money. Don't you ever just splurge?" The word splurge rolled off their tongue like a judgment. Never mind that I was covering half of Rowan's credit card balance that month, or wiring funds for my father's medical copay. Splurging was for those who never saw the invoice. 3 years ago, when Rowan's small venture collapsed, I quietly absorbed the fallout. They had rented an office downtown, posted glossy photos online about a new era of design consulting. The business lasted less than 6 months. When debts came knocking, who steadied the accounts? Me. Yet in family gatherings, Rowan still played the visionary, the creative force. I was introduced as the reliable one, the caretaker, the one who makes it possible. But here's the part they never understood. I never resented helping. In fact, there was pride in it. Pride in knowing the mortgage was current, the insurance secure, the savings intact. Pride in seeing my father sleep soundly after his surgery because the bills had been paid without fuss. Still, favoritism hurt. In subtle ways, it chipped at the edges of my patience. I remember one Sunday morning the family gathered at a cafe owned by Italian immigrants in the neighborhood. It was my ritual spot, dark coffee, warm bread, quiet chatter in the background. Rowan showed up late, sliding into the booth with Casey. They had been shopping. Bags from high-end stores cluttered the floor. Rowan laughed as they ordered cappuccinos, then leaned toward me. "Don't frown, Alex. It's called enjoying life. You should try it sometime." The waitress glanced at me as if to check whether the jab landed. I smiled back and let the words pass. That evening, as I balanced the household account, I noticed Rowan's streaming subscriptions, their meal deliveries, their luxury purchases, all covered from the joint expenses I had set up. Quietly, I began to adjust. I rerouted bills, closed auto payments, and listed expenses under the actual user's name. Each change was small, almost invisible, but together they shifted the ground beneath Rowan's feet. Favoritism in family gatherings did not fade, though. During holiday dinners, my aunt would pat Casey's shoulder, praising their creativity. My uncle would ask Rowan about their next big project, ignoring the fact that it was my salary that had funded the last one. When I spoke of the consulting firm's achievements, steady clients, healthy savings, the room would glaze over. Steady is not glamorous. But what none of them knew was that steady builds power. Steady pays off mortgages, builds inheritance, and writes names into trusts. Steady is the reason I stood silently at Thanksgiving while Rowan made me into the evening's joke. I have a saying I keep tucked in my mind: people remember the storyteller, not the accountant. That was fine by me. Let Rowan and Casey spin stories for social media. Let them gather likes and applause. I was building something they could not touch. And yet every jab, every chuckle at my expense carved the silence deeper. My family believed my patience meant weakness. What they did not know was that silence was a strategy. But what they didn't know was my quiet adjustments had already begun to reshape the balance. And soon the paperwork would speak louder than their laughter. Humiliation grows quietly before it explodes. That Thanksgiving dinner was only the spark. What followed turned into fire. A week after the holiday, Rowan published a long post on social media. A polished photograph of them standing in my kitchen cup of coffee in hand, captioned, "Mature love means freedom partners who live together without pressure, without labels, sharing space, not shackles." The post spread quickly, racking up shares and comments. Friends of theirs joked in the replies, "Perfect arrangement, no rent, all comfort." One even wrote, "Smart move, Rowan. Keep the house, skip the commitment." My neighbors saw it. Even church friends mentioned it with raised eyebrows. Rowan had turned my private life into a stage, and I was cast as the fool. I said nothing. Instead, I went online that night and began quietly shifting accounts. Utilities that had been in my name alone stayed there. No more joint access. Car insurance, I removed Rowan as a listed driver. Credit cards. Canceled the add-on. Subscriptions reassigned or terminated. Small acts almost invisible. But Rowan kept pressing. At my cousin Casey's 30th birthday, held in a noisy bar downtown, Rowan raised a glass once again. To Alex, the best sponsor a family could ask for. Without them, who knows how half of us would pay our bills. Laughter broke out across the table. Casey smirked, nodding in agreement. The waiter dropped the bill beside me. For years I had covered the group. This time I placed my own card down, sliding it only for my meal. The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter had been. And whispers started. A neighbor told me half joking, heard Rowan's got it good, rent-free, bill-free. How'd you manage that deal? At church someone teased. You're generous, Alex. Some of us could use a roommate like that. Every comment landed like a pebble against a window. They thought it was harmless. To me, it was a slow shattering. Emails followed. Rowan's aunt sent one laced with scolding. Why aren't you helping Rowan like before family should sacrifice? You used to be so generous. Don't turn stingy now. I typed a brief reply. Everyone pays their part as agreed. Nothing more. And that was the beginning of my boundary. But the humiliation didn't stop. Rowan organized a holiday dinner, New Year's Eve inviting extended family, friends, and even neighbors into the house I paid for. When midnight struck, Rowan stood on a chair, champagne in hand. To independence, they shouted. Some of us live free because we know how to charm, not because we count pennies. The crowd laughed and clinked glasses. I stood at the edge of the room, nodding politely, my face calm. No one saw the paperwork already resting in a folder in my desk upstairs. Mini hook. What they didn't know was, the ground under their feet was already shifting. One document at a time. One signature at a time. I was preparing the proof that silence is sharper than insults. The first week of January, a call came from my mother's attorney. His voice was calm, businesslike, the way professionals sound when they hold information that can alter lives. Mr. Morgan, he said, it is time to review the updated trust your mother signed 3 years ago. I'll need you to come in. I remember gripping the phone tighter, my tea cooling beside me. Rowan was in the next room humming while scrolling through their phone. I simply said, of course. Send me the details. At the attorney's office, the air smelled of paper and leather, the kind of place where words become law. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside the trust documents, line after line, written in precise legal phrasing, confirmed what my mother had set in place. The family home by the lake, worth nearly $1.8 million, was mine alone, along with the retirement savings she had folded into the trust. But one clause stood out like a bright marker. No cohabitant without legal marriage shall have rights of residence or claim to property. Rowan's name was nowhere. No loophole, no path in. The attorney looked at me kindly. Your mother wanted to be sure her wishes were clear. This protects you. That night, as Rowan posted photos of our shared home on social media, I sat quietly at my desk, the trust papers locked in a folder. My silence was no longer just patience, it was strategy. Days later, another confirmation arrived by email from the bank. Years ago, Rowan had insisted we create a joint account. The truth, it was never joint. It was an account with my name as the sole owner, Rowan, listed only as an authorized user. For every large withdrawal, my approval was required. They had never noticed. Now the bank officer reminded me of it in writing. Another piece of paper, another wall erected. I printed the email, slipped it into the folder beside the trust. The folder grew heavier, not in weight but in power. Rowan, of course, carried on with the theatrics. At a family dinner one Saturday, they smiled at my father and said, "When summer comes, we'll all enjoy weekends at the lake house. Plenty of space for everyone." Heads nodded around the table, my aunt clapping her hands in delight. I simply poured more tea watching the steam rise. They mistook my quiet for agreement. But inside I was counting the days. What do you think they'll do when the paperwork speaks louder than the bragging? Comment your guess I'm reading. By February, the silence I carried was no longer endurance. It was the prelude to a strike. I began with paperwork. A polite notice drafted by my attorney went out to Rowan. Effective next month, household expenses would be divided evenly, no exceptions. Half the mortgage, half the utilities, half the groceries. No more Alex covers the rest. It was written in neutral language, stamped and sent by certified mail. Paper cuts deeper than any argument. When Rowan opened the letter, they laughed. "You can't be serious. Everyone knows this house is basically ours." They waved the notice like a joke, but I said nothing. The moment came at a graduation dinner for my niece. The family filled a restaurant's backroom, glasses raised in celebration. Rowan, riding high on attention, declared loudly, "And soon we'll spend the summer at our lake house." "Can't wait for those weekends," the words echoed. My aunt gasped with joy. My cousin grinned. That was when I reached into my leather folder and slid a single sheet across the table. The trust clause highlighted in yellow stating clearly no residence rights without legal marriage. Rowan's smile froze. My uncle picked up the page, read it aloud, and the room fell quiet. I said only this: "It's best when we all know the truth." The silence that followed was not mine, this time it was theirs. But I was not finished. Minnie Hook. What no one at that table knew was that I had already signed a lease for a new one-bedroom apartment near my office. The move-in date was set for the 1st of the month. The current lease would not be renewed. Rowan would have no roof to claim. The reveal came 2 weeks later. At another family gathering, I placed a single key on the table. Everyone leaned in, expecting an announcement of engagement, maybe even reconciliation. Rowan reached for it, smiling too quickly. "This," I said calmly, "is for my new apartment. The house lease ends in 3 weeks. Rowan, you'll need other arrangements." Gasps rippled through the room. My aunt whispered a prayer. Rowan's face drained of color. No shouting, no fight, just one key, cold and final. I returned home that evening, logged into every account, and removed Rowan's name from the last remaining bills. Car insurance, health premiums, even the streaming services. A quiet digital sweep, each click a cut cord. The next morning I posted my own message online. No sarcasm, no cruelty, just a simple line with a photo of the lake house in winter. Grateful for community that respects boundaries. Moving forward with clarity. It spread almost as quickly as Rowan's post had. But this time the applause was not for charm, it was for dignity. When the final box was carried into my new apartment, I closed the door behind me and let the quiet settle. For the first time in years, the silence was not heavy with humiliation, it was peace. Rowan tried to text the day after the move. "We need to talk." Another came a week later. "We can work this out." I read them, stored them, and said nothing. Silence again this time, not as endurance, but as a boundary. News of the trust spread quickly. Extended relatives who once teased me for being stingy now avoided eye contact. At church, whispers faded. Some even apologized awkwardly briefly, but apologies all the same. Rowan's social media went quiet. The glamorous posts stopped after someone commented beneath their last one, so you don't actually own the place. Within days, the account was scrubbed. My cousin Casey mumbled an apology one afternoon, claiming they didn't mean any harm with the jokes. I nodded politely. Boundaries do not need speeches. They need consistency. The family who once leaned on me for every bill, learned a harder truth: generosity without gratitude has an expiration date. My father shook my hand one Sunday and said only, "Your mother was wise. That was enough." Life now is smaller but lighter. I wake in a modest apartment close to my office. The mornings are mine. Coffee brews quietly. I read the paper on the balcony. On weekends, I drive to the lake house, not with fanfare, but with a steady rhythm. Sometimes I garden. Sometimes I fish. The property is no longer a secret battlefield. It is a gift my mother left to remind me that stability is not weakness, it is strength. Mini Hook, I will tell you later about Rowan's final message, the one I never answered. But for now, the story ends here. I often think of that Thanksgiving table, the smirk, the laughter, the words, "We're just roommates, right?" In the end, they were right, but not in the way they imagined. If you think I did the right thing, comment right. If you believe I should have handled it differently, share your idea. I'll read every one. The apartment is quiet now. The key has changed hands. The house is secured. I still work my hours. I still keep every receipt in a blue folder. We kept one rule: silence until the proof was ready. The paper did the rest: the living trust clause 12. Thanks to the attorney who read it cleanly, the bank officer who confirmed the accounts, and the clerk who filed the notice without fuss. 3 truths: stand boundaries, save time; records cut noise, calm wins. What would you have done first? Call, file, or walk away? Tell me below, tap subscribe, and come back this weekend. Details changed. This channel isn't legal advice. We'll keep it clean. When the final box was carried into my new apartment, I closed the door behind me and let the quiet settle. For the first time in years, the silence was not heavy with humiliation, it was peace. Rowan tried to text the day after the move. "We need to talk." Another came a week later. "We can work this out." I read them, stored them, and said nothing. Silence again, this time not as endurance but as a boundary. News of the trust spread quickly. Extended relatives who once teased me for being stingy now avoided eye contact. At church, whispers faded. Some even apologized awkwardly, briefly, but apologies all the same. Rowan's social media went quiet. The glamorous post stopped after someone commented beneath their last one, so you don't actually own the place. Within days, the account was scrubbed. My cousin Casey mumbled an apology one afternoon, claiming they didn't mean any harm with the jokes. I nodded politely. Boundaries do not need speeches. They need consistency. The family who once leaned on me for every bill learned a harder truth: generosity without gratitude has an expiration date. My father shook my hand one Sunday and said only, "Your mother was wise." That was enough. Life now is smaller but lighter. I wake in a modest apartment close to my office. The mornings are mine. Coffee brews quietly. I read the paper on the balcony. On weekends, I drive to the lake house, not with fanfare, but with a steady rhythm. Sometimes I garden, sometimes I fish. The property is no longer a secret battlefield. It is a gift my mother left to remind me that stability is not weakness, it is strength. Mini Hook, I will tell you later about Rowan's final message, the one I never answered. But for now, the story ends here. I often think of that Thanksgiving table, the smirk, the laughter, the words, "We're just roommates, right?" In the end, they were right, but not in the way they imagined. If you think I did the right thing, comment right. If you believe I should have handled it differently, share your idea. I'll read every one. The apartment is quiet now. The key has changed hands. The house is secured. I still work my hours. I still keep every receipt in a blue folder. We kept one rule silence until the proof was ready. The paper did the rest, the living trust clause 12. Thanks to the attorney who read it cleanly, the bank officer who confirmed the accounts, and the clerk who filed the notice without fuss. Three truths: stand boundaries, save time, records cut, noise calm wins. What would you have done first? Call, file, or walk away? Tell me below. Tap subscribe and come back this weekend. Details changed? This channel isn't legal advice. We'll keep it clean.